Well, without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Sidechain Security's founder and CEO, Andrew Lance, to take us through 5 things to consider when preparing your Vormetric to CipherTrust migration. Andrew.
Thanks, Ian. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started on this webinar. Super excited about this. Thanks everybody for joining, for spending a little bit of time this morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you're at. I know we have people listening in from all over. So my goal with this webinar is to, take us through some of the things that we should be thinking about as you all start considering your shift from Vormetric to CipherTrust. Now, before we get into the actual content here, I just wanted to give a quick background on myself and Sidechain for anybody who's unfamiliar. Again, my name is Andrew. I founded Sidechain almost 4 years ago as a data security consulting firm. You know, we are driven by the belief that no business deserves to be disrupted by cyber attacks, and we help to address this this problem for clients in 2 ways. We have kind of an offensive side to our business where we perform things like penetration testing, vulnerability assessment, security configuration reviews for cloud environments, and so on. We also have a defensive side, and that defensive side is helping clients to implement data protection strategies and solutions, primarily focused on the Thales portfolio of products, to safeguard what we and them consider, in many cases, their most important business asset, which is their data. So that's about us. With that said, let's go ahead and get started here. So when I joined Vormetric back in 2012 and spent many years there and through the acquisition of Thales as well. And it was a shock to me to receive this news, as it may have been for some of you. Not necessarily surprising, but definitely somewhat of a shock, just given the long history that these products have had for many of us. And that news is that Thales has announced the end of life for the Vormetric Data Security Platform. What that means for us is that you as a Vormetric customer have until June 2024. That's 3 years from when the announcement was made, but it's less than 3 years now. It's 2 years and counting, to make a choice. You can choose to migrate off of Vormetric onto the kind of replacement next generation platform from Thales called CipherTrust, or you can consider an alternative. Either way, a choice will have to be made. The Vormetric platform will no longer be an option post this end of life. And so one way or the other, you're going to have to choose how you move forward off of Vormetric by that kind of time frame. Now, the 3-year kind of cliff might feel like plenty of time, but in reality, you can't really afford to wait. I would suspect for some of us, as an outcome of this webinar, this is actually going to be a slightly bigger deal than you may have thought it was going to be. There's a lot of moving parts and a lot of things to consider. And in fact, that's what I'd like to spend the next 20 or so minutes discussing, is the reasons why I'm going to highly recommend you not wait to start considering what this migration to CipherTrust looks like. To get in front of this, don't get trapped behind the 8 ball or have to make decisions that are kind of time constrained. There's still plenty of time to put a strategy in place, but you've got to start now. So look, I understand as well as anybody that there's a reason why you as Vormetric customers chose to standardize on this solution. I've been a huge advocate for this platform, both at my time at Vormetric and Thales and now at Sidechain. And there's a good reason why you've continued to invest in Vormetric to protect what are in many cases your crown jewels. These are production implementations. Many of them are huge in scale, and you've invested heavily in making Vormetric work for your organization. I also can appreciate the fact that moving to a new solution, whether it's CipherTrust or something else, is a big deal. It's highly impactful. And given the fact that this is encryption we're talking about, it can be extremely sensitive in terms of how a new platform is implemented and migrated to. So I get it. And that's all the more reason why we want to make sure that we're set up for success when you're planning and then executing your CipherTrust migration. There's a couple things I wanted to point out that may help as you start the process of thinking about your CipherTrust migration. First, it may sound obvious, but you really need to have a deliberate strategy for what you're doing. I would encourage everybody to use this as an opportunity to really evaluate your data security needs. Have they changed from when you onboarded Vormetric in the beginning? What are your data protection and data security needs now, and what are they going to look like in the future? And start to craft your go-forward strategy based on that. Not what you've done in the past per se, but what you need to carry forward. Do that requirements gathering process, understand what your data protection needs are, and that hopefully will help inform the strategy that you need to go forward out of this end of life. The other success factor that I would mention here is you really need to know your readiness. And what I mean by that is you really need to understand where you're at today so you know where you need to get to and how you're going to make that happen. And I'll give you an example. For right now, there's not a one-to-one parity between features in Vormetric and some of the features in CipherTrust. It's just not there yet. So if you are ready to make the move to CipherTrust, say in the next quarter or two, there may be a gap analysis that has to happen in order for you to make that jump. Whereas if you do it a year from now, that might not happen. But you only can assess that if you know where you're at today. So that's another thing I just want to kind of put out there for you right now to be considering as you get ready to move forward. And my hope is that if you think about those things and you consider the 5 things we're going to discuss on this webinar, you'll get clarity about what this thing means to your organization and what it's going to look like when you're ready to move to CipherTrust. Okay, so the 5 things. Here's the 5 things. These are what we're going to be discussing over the next 15, 20 minutes as part of the webinar here. So if you want, I've put an indicator right there that I would encourage you guys to take a screenshot of this if you have that capability. This right here is the key takeaway. And now, anytime you see this indicator down here on the slides, that's a slide that Ian and I thought might be a good opportunity for you to take a screenshot of. So I'll point that out, but just so you know, there's a few slides where I think it's particularly useful to grab a screenshot. The 5 things. Let's get started going down and discussing each one of these in turn. Okay. Oh, and I guess I'll also just take the opportunity, like Ian said before, I would be open to doing Q&A at the end of this if anybody has questions. So use the question box in the webinar. Feel free to type that in, and as we have time at the end, I'd be happy to address those. Okay. So the first thing to consider is I want to emphasize that this migration is not going to be easy. Okay, you have to come to grips with the fact that this is what I would call a major project. Look, I mean, no upgrade or migration is easy. And despite whatever the documentation says and marketing material and so on, this is a big deal. So what do you do to plan for the scale of what this migration is going to look like for your Vormetric implementation? Well, like I mentioned before, that gap analysis is huge. Where are you at today will inform where you need to be in terms of your CipherTrust migration. It will also determine which use cases to pull forward. However, I believe the most powerful tool in understanding the scale and scope of this effort is going to be asking some how questions. How are we going to migrate our data to CipherTrust? How are we going to ensure we have high availability for every step of the way and going forward in our new platform? How long is this migration going to take? How much is this going to cost? If you list down these how questions, and more will probably come to mind, I would encourage you to start thinking about how you would answer each one of these. Please take a screenshot of this slide, because what I would recommend doing is either starting a document or getting a working session with your team put together. Put these questions right here into that and start addressing each one of them. If you can't answer these questions, you're nowhere close to being able to migrate to CipherTrust. You need to understand these things so you can put the project plan together that's going to represent your unique migration. Everybody's environment's different. So this is just a jumpstart of starting to think about how you're going to scope out what this effort looks like. Okay. So the second consideration that I want to point out is that CipherTrust is a great platform. Okay, it is a great product, but it is not a DSM. It is not a DSM next generation. Okay, it is a completely different product built from the ground up, and it has a lot of great capabilities, but it also has a lot of differences. So what this means is you're going to have a lot of new stuff to deal with when you make this migration. CipherTrust is going to have a brand new UI that you're going to have to get used to. It's going to have new command line interface, new APIs. It's got new models for managing users and keys and administrators. It's got a whole bunch of new management capabilities that you didn't have in Vormetric. And it doesn't have some of the stuff you might have grown accustomed to in your DSM. So I don't care how long you've been using Vormetric, everybody is going to have to be trained up on using and managing CipherTrust and making it successful in your organization. Don't think that you can, just because you're an expert on the DSM, that's going to make it a little easier. It will, but this is a new product, so just be prepared for that. Kind of dovetailing off of that is another challenge that clients are already starting to recognize, and that is this. Your Vormetric implementation is centered around operationalizing a data security solution, of course, but to actually make that work, you probably have a library of assets that you've created, things like run books, standard operating procedures, architecture documents. We have customers that manage entire wikis on kind of knowledge bases on for their Vormetric implementation. They have such large footprints for that and large teams. So I hate to say it, but a lot of that stuff is either going to have to be revised, rewritten, or in some cases created from scratch. Because again, this is a different product. This is not DSM 2.0. This is it's new. So I wanted to point this out because another key consideration when you're kind of scoping the level of effort that your migration is going to look like, you need to factor this in as well. Because oftentimes, security teams, look, I mean, you have the responsibility of operationalizing the Vormetric implementation. Now it's going to be CipherTrust. You have to get trained up on it. You have to run it, respond when there are issues, and all of that support, that's your full-time work. Scoping in the extra bandwidth to go back and rewrite, hundreds of pages of standard operating procedures to represent a new product like CipherTrust, that can easily get overlooked, but is absolutely necessary for most of these implementations, especially if you have, multiple team members or even a larger team. This is absolutely critical. So don't forget about this side of things, because it could be a kind of material level of work. We don't want to forget about that. Okay, consideration number 4. Let's just cut to the chase. Anybody who's used Vormetric or other encryption technologies knows that when encryption goes wrong, well, need I say more? Encryption is not passive technology, okay? It is right in the middle of all of your production workloads. And if it goes bad, you've got a big, big problem on your hands. So what is the takeaway here? Whatever your migration strategy looks like, it has to be no failure allowed, period. It just cannot allow any room for failure. What does it mean to build a no failure migration path? What do we do with customers when we do these kind of things? Well, think through a few items here. First off, do you have the right staff? Do you have the right team, the right support, the right resources to actually pull off a no failure migration of your sensitive and production data onto this new platform? Second thing to consider, how will you deal with data loss? The goal here is to prevent it from happening at all costs. You cannot let that happen. It just can't be an option at all. So how are you going to build a migration plan that prevents data loss? And to build on that, how will you migrate without any business disruption? Is it possible? In your environment, it might be impossible. And if doing this without business disruption is impossible, why? And what's that disruption going to look like? If it's possible, then you've architected things in a way that will allow you to migrate and cut over in a way that minimizes or even eliminates business disruption. But that's only possible when you have rollback plans in your migration, when you have post-validation testing to make sure that the migration happened 100% correctly, and that you're ready to support this thing once you actually cut over. So go ahead and take a screenshot of this, because I think this is absolutely critical path, part of your migration plan. And I would encourage each of you to answer those questions for yourself when you're putting your plan together. Remember, Ian pointed this out when we were putting this material together. No vendor has a test environment like your production environment. They can test this stuff all day long, but your environments are unique to you. So if you're going to ensure a no failure migration to CipherTrust, that will rest with you and your ability to develop a no failure migration path that is unique to your production environment, okay? Absolutely critical. Okay, and look, I mean, the fifth consideration that I would encourage all of you to go through is this is a prime opportunity to evaluate this product, this solution, and you may want to think, is CipherTrust aligned with your long-term data protection requirements? Are there alternatives to consider? Maybe you're moving assets to the cloud rapidly, and there's a way you can take advantage of native encryption from your cloud provider, or native key management, so on. Maybe there's another product that your enterprise has that you can repurpose and consolidate on. It's worth thinking through. Don't get me wrong, CipherTrust is an awesome platform, and I highly advocate the use of it, especially if customers have been happy with Vormetric. But this is the time where You know, you should take the opportunity to just make sure before you make this leap that this is your go forward plan that aligns best with your data protection strategies. Okay, so that's the 5 things. That's the key things. Those are the key things that I believe everybody should be considering with regard to your CipherTrust migration. So how do you get started? Well, bottom line is you start now. Okay, it's absolutely critical that you don't let this run away from you. So want to point out one way that you can get started right now with your CipherTrust to Vormetric migration. Like I said before, knowing where you're at right now is a critical piece to starting to build your migration plan. I'll give you examples. What versions of the products, of the Vormetric products, are you on? Because you're going to have to be upgraded to the latest and greatest if you're going to effectively migrate into CipherTrust. What's the stability look like of your system? Is your Vormetric implementation configured to support a migration into CipherTrust? Is it stable enough to support the migration? All these things can be evaluated by us in a health check that we provide for your Vormetric implementation. We'll come in, we'll evaluate all of this stuff for you and give you that snapshot of where you're at today, which will help give you vision into where you need to go for your migration. And I will add what we're also bundling into our Vormetric health checks now is a CipherTrust migration roadmap, no additional cost. And basically we'll take the outcome of the health check and we'll go through an exercise with you and basically go through a lot of the stuff I talked about in this webinar and build that kind of roadmap and plan for you. So it's a framework by which you can get started with your CipherTrust migration planning. So take advantage of this. I will say that oftentimes with these webinars, I've been through these things enough times, and I know all of you have. It's very easy to wrap this all up, close the window, go back to your email that you haven't seen in the last half hour, and just kind of move on with life. I would encourage you, do not do that. If this is interesting to you, or you want to have a talk with one of us or myself about this in more detail, open a web browser right now. Go to sidechainsecurity.com/be-ready. Learn more, see what that offers you, and if you want to set up a time to chat, happy to do that. Don't wait. If you want to, if this is interesting to you, just do that right now. Okay, so that being said, that's the end of the webinar. Really appreciate everybody's time this morning. It looks like we do have a couple of questions, so if you would like to hang out for just a little bit longer, I'd be happy to run through these and answer some questions. Okay, so first question is, how much will it cost me to upgrade? Okay, so the migration to CipherTrust in terms of pricing, you'll have to work with your Thales rep to get, of course, all the details. But what I can tell you is this: Thales is going to require you to buy new CipherTrust appliances to replace your DSM appliances. But you will be able to continue to use your transparent encryption agents that you have deployed. So you won't have to rebuy agents. So there definitely will be budget required to migrate over, and the cost of those CipherTrust Manager appliances to replace your DSMs will depend on their configurations, just like the DSMs. You can get virtual, physical, with HSM cards, FIPS level 3. There's a bunch of different configurations of things, but bottom line is that will be a pricing component for migration. Okay, second question: will any solution include having to decrypt our existing data first, or is there a way to migrate our keys without having to decrypt? That's a great question, actually. So yes, a migration path should be achievable for everybody to not require the decryption of data. Now, I would obviously say that's non-trivial, But yes, we should not have to decrypt data in terms of doing the migration. And the reason for that is that the keys that were used to encrypt your data with Vormetric will be migrated and available to your transparent encryption agents even after we've moved to CipherTrust. So and also if you're using live data transformation, that too will be supported. So no problem there. You should not have to decrypt data in order to perform the migration. Third question, do I need to upgrade the agents, like VTE agents? The answer is yes, you do need to upgrade your agents. Now, you can use the compatibility matrix for this, or we can help, kind of understand what the target versions should be for you. But yeah, if you've got legacy agents or you have agents that are older, that will be a requirement. And I should also say, you'll have to upgrade your DSMs as well in order to perform this migration. So you're gonna want to make sure that you're pretty much on the latest and greatest before you get anywhere close to migrating into CipherTrust. That's pretty much going to be a requirement. So next question, will new agents specific to CipherTrust be deployed as well? Okay, so on the agent side, the good news is there's a lot of backwards compatibility that Thales has put in place for the transparent encryption agents. And fortunately, that migration of those agents will be pretty smooth. You do need to be upgraded to close to the latest when you facilitate your migration. But there are CipherTrust specific agents now that are available that you'll want to deploy going forward after your migration. So there's definitely an agent management piece to this, but I would say in general, just make sure that your agents are upgraded to a near new version, kind of latest and greatest, and that will facilitate the migration much, much smoother than having to go through and do that, later on. Another question, if I have a virtual appliance, is the migration only compatible with hardware appliances? Okay, yeah, that's a really good question. We run into this as well with DSMs. So what's the compatibility between virtual appliances and hardware appliances and so on? I will just say, I would encourage everybody on this webinar to be thinking about the role of virtual appliances in their next generation platform. There isn't always an opportunity to use virtualized appliances. If you have extended security requirements, if you have FIPS certification requirements, et cetera, then you're going to have hardware HSMs. Hardware CipherTrust managers or DSMs. But I would also say that there is some compatibility depending on the configuration of your cluster. You can mix and match also in some ways, not every way. So you could have some virtual appliances and some hardware appliances, especially if you're using external HSMs and not the hardware appliances with built-in HSMs. So short answer, there are ways to configure your cluster to facilitate either migrating from virtual to hardware, from hardware to virtual, or a mix and match kind of hybrid approach. It just all has to be planned out according to what's compatible. Okay, looks like another question here. Are you also planning a migration path for Gemalto Key Secure to CipherTrust Manager, or only focusing on DSM? Okay, great question. The fact of the matter is that while we focused on Vormetric today, Thales is end of lifing all of the legacy Gemalto and Vormetric products and moving to the new CipherTrust platform for all of them. At Sidechain, our sweet spot is Vormetric. So we're a go-to, and would absolutely raise our hand to support any implementation migrating of Vormetric to CipherTrust. We are planning on developing a practice around Key Secure in 2022. So we're going to eat some of that runway that key secure customers have in order to come up to speed on that. But our ambition is to develop a practice that we can confidently take customers through a key secure to CipherTrust manager migration as well, but we're not there yet. That's how I'd characterize that. Next question. Will I lose my live data transformation licenses that I have already purchased? Actually, that's a really good question. Because the license transferring is a little bit different in the new platform. And without going into too much detail, and I know we're up on time here, I'll just say the way that agents are licensed in the CipherTrust model is different. Okay, it is different. And the way live data transformation is licensed will be a little bit different too. You're still going to have to pay for LDT on top of your agent licenses, just like you had to do with Vormetric. But the good news is, no, you will not lose those licenses after doing this migration. All that stuff should be carried forward, and you should be able to achieve continuity with your licensing, no problem. Looks like the last question here is an external. Okay, second to last question. Is an external HSM compatible with CipherTrust Manager? Absolutely, yes. Yes. External HSM is compatible with CipherTrust Manager. We have many customers who are implementing that architecture. I would advocate for an architecture like that, no problem. So if an HSM is important for you, you have a choice. You either get appliances with HSMs built in, which then requires you to manage things like smart cards and all the remote manageability stuff, which can be a challenge, but is definitely possible. Or you can stand up CipherTrust managers, virtual or physical, and just use external HSMs. And actually the management of that is in some ways even easier. It may not seem like it because you've got to have these separate boxes, but in some ways we feel like it's almost easier to manage an HSM root of trust that way. At any rate, to answer the question directly, yes, HSMs are compatible with CipherTrust Manager. And finally, last question, in a health check analysis, do we get a report which lists on all hosts in each domains? So yes, that's exactly what you get from a health check. We'll go through and we'll analyze all of the agents across all of your domains, and we'll do a health check on all of them, and we'll go through and enumerate, where you're at with those. One of the things we're adding to our health check to get ready for CipherTrust Manager is a closer analysis of the versions. It used to be in the past, it didn't really matter. If you had really old versions of agents, we'd flag that and kind of recommend, that you plan an upgrade for those, but it wasn't that big of a deal. Now, it's a big deal because you need to be ready for your migration. So we'll also point out some agent versioning information, and that'll be part of the health check report as well. Okay, so that's it, everybody. Thanks so much for attending. It's really great to talk about this stuff with you. If you have any follow-on, any other questions, go to sidechainsecurity.com/be-ready. Learn more, get in touch with us. We love to work with all of you. Okay, thanks everybody. Have a great rest of your day.